So this is gonna be a fun one. We have been broke before, and so we had a few requests on the show of like, well, what do you do when you are out of money?
When you have no money.
Yeah, right. And unfortunately, we all know what that feels like.
Mm-hmm.
It's
if
stressful.
You started a business, you for sure know.
Yes.
Yeah.
So in today's, we're going to kind of break down a few things, but I think no matter how bad it is, you just got to take a deep breath. Like you're not defined by your money. Yeah. You have inherent worth that has nothing to do with your net worth.
Take away that.
There you
That's
go.
like a little nugget. If you hear nothing else today, you have inherent worth, and it has nothing to do with the money in your bank account.
Yes, totally. But when you don't have money in your bank account,
you still have to solve the problem.
It's stressful.
Yeah.
It's painful. And I think that affects our emotions in so many ways too. Like you can be depressed, you can be down on yourself, you can just, you carry a weight, and that's tough. It's tough to function. So today I'm hoping we can kind of get into this a little bit more. Like being broke is not the problem. Yeah. It's just a symptom. Yeah. And so, number one, we're going to say, well, we have the symptom. What are the problems? What do we do about it? Yeah.
Yeah. So, I mean, just to be clear, we're talking about what do you do when you're broke today?
Yes.
I mean, and this is going to be a 2-part series, just to kind of tee that up too, just so that it's a lot to pack in, and it's probably not even exhaustive, kind of like some of what we've prepped, but just to give an idea of like, maybe some of the why behind where you're at and how to move forward.
Yeah. I think we just need to start diagnosing the problem too. Like how bad is it? Maybe the bank account's overdrawn. You have bills that are due that can lead to foreclosure, that can lead to liens, whatever's going on there. Is that actively happening, or are you afraid of that happening? Really like knowing, okay, take stock of where you're at as a business or as a person, like what's going on in your life. And sometimes the fear of the future or the fear of the unknown can make us do stupid things.
Yeah, it can prevent you from learning what you need to learn today.
Yeah. And I think there's the other thing about pain is we learn from pain, and our bodies, if we touch something hot, we know, well, don't do that again.
Right.
So I have 4 boys, and so like they're learning.
They're learning lots of things.
I don't put them in scenarios where I hope they experience it, but every once in a while,
you're
going to
touch
touch
an
object, and they're going to learn from those things, and we all do.
Sure.
So I think. Maybe just dive into the symptoms a little more, Kinsey. I mean, what kind of things would people be experiencing if they have a money problem?
Yeah, I think a lot of what we hear and kind of just like what we've seen in helping some businesses and working alongside businesses and in business is, some symptoms would be you're consistently out of money, your accounts are overdrawn, maybe you're unable to pay your bills. It could be struggling with cash flow, at the end of projects too. You're running out of money at the end of projects, things like that. And so I think a lot of those, there's probably more symptoms than just the 4 that I just stated, but kind of like we said earlier, they're the symptoms, not necessarily the problems.
Yes.
And so I think the more meaningful thing to dive into is really like, well, what are the root problems of that? Because I think those symptoms can be a lot of times what we sweep a lot of things under.
Yes.
In terms of like, oh, well, it's because I'm just always out of money, or like, just kind of like blanket statements and not really knowing why you're actually.
I can't tell you guys how often people will come and say, well, the reason why I'm out of money is because I had this one guy I was working for. In this one example, somebody said the reason why I'm broke is because we had this one job and went sideways. The guy didn't pay. He was just a crook. Yeah. And so therefore we're broke. And it's there's some truth to every story.
Right.
There's something about that. It's like, yeah, well, that might have happened.
Yeah.
But is that really all of the problem?
Yeah.
It's part of it. But maybe it's speaking to something else. A lot of times we use symptoms and just say, well, I'm broke, so therefore this is true. And the stories can be wrong. Yeah. The other thing about stories is, do you have any agency in the story as well? Like, are you actually in control of the situation, or are you just saying there's nothing that can be done about it? Yeah. I'm just the victim here, and there's really nothing to be done.
Yeah. You're the first person that I heard the, like, what stories are you telling yourself, mentally, to like, what are you believing about a certain thing? And it's like, hey, well, because of these events that happened in my life, I think that this is true. Yeah. And so it's like analyzing those stories. You're the first person that I ever heard say that. And the first time I was like, what does he even mean?
Yeah. What are you talking about? This story stuff,
So theoretical of these stories.
Yeah. But well, and I think we just understand the world from like
your perspective.
Yeah, perspectives, right? The stories, or like, what's another way of saying that? I mean, just that you see things through a lens.
Through your lens.
Yeah. Of just like, we explain things of like, well, the reason why that happened is because of this.
Yeah.
And sometimes it's too simple.
Yeah. No, you're right.
Yeah. So in the biggest challenge here, guys, is really in diagnosing the real problem. I think that's what we're talking about, because it's too easy to just get off and say, well, be very simplistic about the explanation.
Right.
So,
so kind of break down. We have, I think we have four things we're going to hit on in terms of problems today.
Yeah.
And then we have another couple, 3, 4 for the next episode.
So heavy.
Break
guys.
down, break down some of those problems that, we identified and, think are real root problems behind some of that.
The number one thing that I've personally experienced and seen almost universally seen other people experience when they're dealing with money is a lack of knowledge.
Okay. What do you mean?
So, do you have the data that gives you the insight of what's really going on? Yeah. So we can make assumptions about, well, the bank account's dry, we don't have the money, but why is that happening? Right. And so therefore we have to run with some simple explanation because we don't have any other data.
Yeah. So
we need to know where we're at. I had this old carpenter I worked with, and on one of my dad's projects when I was a kid, and at lunchtime, he said he had asked his father, "Dad, have you ever been lost before?" And his dad said, "No, I've never been lost, but there was the time where I didn't know where I was for 3 days." And I think it's kind of witty, but at the same time, I think it does speak to something larger than that. If you don't know where you're at, you don't know whether you're going the right direction. You don't know if you're going the wrong direction. I mean, if you just plopped yourself in the middle of a big city and said, okay, get your way out of here, you don't even know how you got there.
Right.
And so I think that's what knowledge provides us. It says, okay, where are we at? And I think in kind of when it comes to money, you just need to know what you're making each week.
Yeah. So like where you're at as a business from a financial standpoint is what we're saying.
Yeah. And I think not to overcomplicate this, because it can be like, well, the profit and loss statement and balance sheet, and like those things are hard to come at. I mean, like it's hard to come by a profit and loss statement. So I want to simplify this for everybody.
Yeah.
If you have money problems, or you have symptoms, let's just say, like you have the symptoms of a money problem,
right?
You need to know where you're at. You need knowledge, number one. So what you need to do is forget all your accounting software, forget your accountant for a minute, even because this is your problem. This is not, nobody else is going to help you with this. You need to know, am I making money? And don't even go into the ancient past.
Yeah.
Data from 3 months ago, just pretend it's irrelevant.
Yeah. Because you're broke. You need to know where you're at.
You need to know where you're at. Okay. So last week, what happened? And so get a pad of paper, get a spreadsheet, whatever your thing is, whatever the tool you feel most comfortable with. Is it a handsaw or a circular saw?
It doesn't have to be a fancy software tool, is what we're saying. Like it just
very basic.
Get it,
right. You
get
need
it on paper.
You need 3 columns.
Yep.
So number one, you need to find out, okay, how much money did I make? Now, let's not get confused with this too, because it's not what you necessarily got in the bank account last week. Okay. Yep. You need to know, well, what did I bill out for that last week? Okay. Yeah. So what did I earn? As in, not what I got as a deposit, not what I invoiced out to people, not what I got in my bank account, but what did I earn last week?
The work that you did.
Exactly. What did I get done? That? Yes, exactly. Okay. How many billable hours did I have, and what was that worth? What am I billing people for last week? So that's your income column. Okay. That's how much money you earned as a business.
Maybe didn't make yet, but earned.
Right. Yeah. Right. You earned it. Yeah. It might not be in your bank account, but it's money owed to you.
Yeah.
So secondly, we need to figure out what our direct costs are. That means your costs of materials, labor, subcontractors, equipment, whatever went into the projects that you did. What are those direct costs? So get the receipts out, get the credit card statement, whatever it is, whatever that source of truth is, add all that up. Yeah. So then okay, these are the expenses for the direct costs, and it might get murky as far as like what's overhead and what is a direct cost. But as long as
your direct costs should be like specific to the job that you were working on.
Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. And then you need to figure out what your overhead is, and these are these are the recurring expenses. And to be clear, this could include. We have several other episodes on this too,
and some YouTube videos too on like calculating overhead, things like that. So
and I think we have a blog article on this as well.
We've got a lot,
which I think I need to redo because it just seems too technical. Like what we need to do is get our overhead calculator finished in the software.
I know we're working on that.
Anyway, it's gonna be exciting.
We'll hawk that one.
Yeah,
when it lands.
So 3 columns, guys. So number 1, income. Number 2, expenses. And then you have your overhead. Okay. And so total up the overhead, divide it by 4.3, which is how many weeks are in a month.
Okay.
So then you have your overhead. And so they're going to take your income,
right,
subtract the expenses, subtract the overhead. And then what you're left with is either a positive or a negative number. If it's positive, you made money. If it's negative, you lost money.
Right.
So if you're losing money, how would that impact your decision making, right? Yeah. I mean, what are you going to do differently about it? And it's what's beautiful about that is, remember we talked about pain earlier? Mm-hmm. Well, when you experience pain, it's an instant response. You touch a hot stove, you pull that hand back immediately. The problem is, it's like a half-hour delay between touching the stove and feeling pain. You're going to get burnt bad. Yeah. as opposed to having an instant response. You need an instant response. So you feel the pain immediately and you can make a response to it.
It's really good.
So once you have that, okay, whoa, I lost money last week. When I knew that as a business, I said, I lost $5,000 last week.
Yeah.
There was a time in my business where I lost, which some guys are like, that's nothing. But
but still.
But nonetheless, for me, that was a lot of money. And
Yeah.
like, how did that happen? What am I going to do about it?
Yeah.
I tell you what, we didn't do that 2 weeks in a row. Whereas if we had gone 16 weeks and not known that, and suddenly we're out of money, suddenly we're like, oh no, we have a huge problem. What are we going to do about it? As opposed to being reactive. So this is why knowledge is important.
Yeah. So how'd you solve that real use case from that one? And maybe I'm getting ahead, but from losing $5,000 that 1 week, what'd you change the next week?
Okay. So in fact, we were able to even fix it that previous week, because what happened is we started digging into and saying, okay, well, this is what we did. This is our expenses. This is our overhead.
Yeah.
And our overhead was factored into our markup. So it wasn't like we didn't know what the overhead should cost.
Sure.
Why did we lose $5,000 on $25,000 of stuff we built out, or whatever the numbers were exactly? And we come to find out, well, we had done work we never billed for. And because it was so close in time to when we had done it, I was able to sit down with that customer and say, last week we had done additional work, which we forgot to change order. Yeah. And he was saying, okay, well, that's fine. I'll pay for it. Yeah. Now try that 3 months later.
Well, sure.
Nobody's paying for it. But it was in the moment. He's saying, well, that's the fair thing to do.
Yeah.
Like, I wanted something more and you did it, and I'll pay for it.
Yeah, we had a conversation about it, whatever.
Right.
Yeah.
Now, let's say in an instance where you're dealing with somebody unreasonable and said, no, you said 10,000 and it's going to be 10,000. Well, at least you can cut the losses and say, well, we know who we're dealing with.
Right. Somebody's eating that expense.
Right.
Though,
Right. And you're going to say, well, I'm dealing with a customer that's not going to be reasonable as well. That's another thing that's going to come out of that.
Yeah. And so probably don't agree to more work with that customer. would be some advice.
Or get those change orders up front. You're saying, okay, I've got an issue here I need to deal with.
Don't do work until it's signed off on, essentially.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. Let's make sure that's there.
That's good.
And I think the other thing we did as a part of that was started recognizing how much the overhead was.
Yeah.
And that could sneak up on you, Kinsey. I mean, as a business owner, you start, my business was scaling. We started just one person to two and to three, and the next thing you're hiring more people, and then you have office staff. Right. And you lose a little bit of efficiency in some respects. You scale, but you lose some ability to like be really lightweight. I mean, we've experienced that as a company
agile.
too.
Yeah, that's true.
So the next thing you know, the overhead's 23% instead of 10%. Right. If you're one guy in a truck, you have hardly any overhead.
Right.
Whereas if you have 5 trucks and an office, and the overhead went up.
A lot, yeah.
So that sheet will give you that. And this scales with a business as well. Have a weekly, I don't care if you guys have 1 employee or you have 100. You need to know if you made money last week.
Yeah. How often did you reassess your column sheet, if you will? Yeah. Was it like a weekly practice?
Once a week we did it, yeah. And I think there's some, when I started off with forget the accountant. I'm not undervaluing an accountant, but this is stuff an accountant can't give you. Yeah. They don't know this is data only the person that's running that business knows.
Yeah. How much work did you do? Your accountant can't tell you that.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. And that's why it's, we sometimes kind of pass the buck on to the accounting people and say, well, I'm making money. And they go, well, look at last year. Well, you made this much. Well, last year is too long ago.
Right.
What happened last year doesn't mean you're going to make money this year. Sure. And I know we talked about this in the podcast before as well, but how many people do we know that are running businesses and COVID hits or supply chain problems or costs go up on materials and they start being on the edge of bankruptcy because they didn't know what they made last week.
Yeah, a lot of conversations. Yeah.
What else are we missing as a part of the whole weekly thing as well? If you know where you're at last week, I think it would inform your estimating. It would inform change orders. It would inform your production as well. Yeah. Are you getting things done fast enough? Are you working on the right jobs? That was another piece as well. We had 7 jobs running at the same time, with 3 of them were at the end in the punch order or punch list. Yeah. Punch orders.
It's a new kind of punch list.
Oh man, would to God there was a thing. Well, we're gonna issue a punch order for that. Too much of a punch
probably
list.
Wouldn't know. I think too,
it's brilliant.
It allows you to cut expenses too, if you need to. Of if you're actually calculating out your overhead and have your full list of what is actually going out, then you can pinpoint exact places where you could potentially save money.
Yeah. And if it's going the wrong direction, we've had those moments too. Of just being like, wait a second, we're trending wrong and we're trending wrong fast. What are we going to do about it? Right. Once you're saying, okay, I need to do something quick.
For sure.
Yeah.
No, that's good. I think another problem we talked about is, sales. Yes. Sales is another problem too, like the symptom that we talked about earlier. You're probably not selling enough or might not be selling enough. Yep. And so if you don't have enough work, you're not busy enough. you don't have enough billable hours. You have to be careful with that though. I know you were mentioning that earlier when we were prepping. You have to be careful with it because a lot of times you can assume that being busier is solving that problem.
Yeah.
But we have a lot of sales episodes that we've talked about on earlier podcasts too about, well, if you're not winning the right jobs, then it's not a fix.
So what's the ratio here? I mean, should we be winning all of our jobs? I mean, sometimes it's a status symbol. Like I only win, I win all of the jobs I bid.
Yeah. I think a lot of people try to hawk that of like, oh, I'm 90% close rate.
Yeah.
And I'm like, well, then you're probably not making, you could probably do half the jobs and bill a little bit more and work for the client that you actually want to work for.
Yeah. So you're being more selective. One of my mentors, who was a phenomenal salesperson, he would go in and actually try to scare the client off in a certain way of just being, well, that's usually cost twice as much as what he would normally charge, just to kind of like as a top end range. Just being like, that could cost you $150,000 to do a kitchen, and then we would do it for 75 or 80,000.
Yeah.
He wanted to make sure that was the right client he wanted to work for. He didn't want to work for everybody.
Yeah, which I think is very wise, and I think it requires some experience though to get there because it's a total mentality shift. Yes. You're like that sounds wrong when we say that. But it's like somebody is giving a discount to win every job. Somebody's losing money, and it's probably you. If you're winning every job, because then you're like, oh, okay, you got another bid. Okay, I'll match it. But it's like, it's not wise to match somebody else's bid if you know your costs and you know what you need to make and you know what I mean. That's not wisdom.
Yeah. And one of the other sales things could be is you just don't have any. I mean, I've experienced this as well. You don't have the volume in your pipeline.
Right.
To react to losing jobs. And so you almost are, you're feeling like I have to win every job. I've got 3 leads right now. And if I win all 3, we'll be in business.
Yep.
And that's a bad spot to be. And really what you're putting yourself in a position where you're counting on things happening that may not happen, as opposed to being like, my problem is not that I need to close 3 jobs. My problem is that I don't have 10 jobs where I can lose 7 and close 3.
Exactly.
And so therefore it's like, okay, well, we have a marketing problem, right? I mean, we don't have a volume of leads that we need. We need to be able to connect with more people.
Yeah.
And so sometimes we're like, well, we never advertise. It's like, well, maybe you need to change that.
Yeah. Maybe you need to change that or be creative in your sales efforts of, there's Facebook groups, local Facebook groups where people always ask, does anybody know somebody who can do this kind of job or whatever? Like you should be quick on the draw on some of those kinds of things. Like it doesn't require advertising dollars because if you're broke, you're like, I don't have money to pay for marketing. Right. That's the
reality of it.
True fact, of our conversation today. And so it's like, there are other creative ways. Ask your past customers if they know anybody that is looking for a job, or if they could put you in contact with somebody that they know of. Ask your former, customers for referrals. Be active on social media because it's free, like, I mean, it is a free channel to where you can get your brand in front of people. And so anyway, I think that's like a business development effort that is time well spent. Doesn't require a lot of time because there's posts like that popping off every day.
Yeah, but show off your work too, guys. I mean, you're building beautiful things. I would start putting that up on your social channels. Yes. I mean, just being like, hey, this is what I'm. And it doesn't even have to be completed work,
right?
But it's like we're actively working on this kind of project. And I guess another tip is a lot of times we want to hawk ourselves in that process of being like, call us if you need another whatever siding job or whatever, as opposed to being more. This is what we're working on, and kind of just showing the final product and let your customer talk for you.
Yeah, I totally agree. I think if it's a completed project, posting that on your page, tagging your customer's name, and then they'll likely share that on their page because they're like all proud of the thing that they paid for, and that they have now a Pinterest worthy house or whatever it is.
Right. And thanks, Bob for
being an awesome customer. Exactly. Blah, blah, blah. It was so fun working together. Like blah, blah. Something like that. Like you can be creative with some of that is free. Like that's just a little bit of time.
Yeah. So I guess the sales, what we talk about, like the pipeline, is potentially a problem.
Yeah.
That the symptom of being out of money is exposing. Right. So not winning the right jobs, not winning the right, and not having enough work. I guess would be the other piece we didn't talk about is it's not just about necessarily, let's say you have, deal flow aside, you might find yourself in a position where it's like, I don't have enough billable hours to pay my bills.
Yep.
And so that's more or less, okay, well, let's take it one step further. And that's what the lack of deal flow is the root problem behind not having enough work.
Yeah.
So those are some hacks. We've got other episodes on it. There's other people out there that have great content on this as well, and I think we can
for sure. And we'll link to like our other episodes too, in case guys missed it.
Yeah.
In this one, we'll link to those in our description below. But just kind of try to shortcut some of those things to
Is
like
it
dive
the
in deeper.
the learning to sell episode, I think, is the one where we need to link to.
Yeah, learning how to sell,
Yeah.
I think is the specific episode.
Yeah.
So there might be another subtitle on it. But
Okay. Yeah.
and then the other thing we talked about, and we've talked about this in a lot of episodes as well, is poor estimating. Like
It's why we exist.
It's why we exist. You know, it's why Congenius exists, and a lot of times a reason for why you're losing money and don't know it.
Mhm.
You know, I think we've talked about it in some episodes as well. Another one we can link is, you know, stop ballparking your bids. You know, people are using round numbers on bids, and it's really, really dangerous to do that because you don't know if you're actually going to make money on it if you don't know how much the job costs you. And so I think we say that on almost every episode, but I'm like, until people believe it and know it, that it's true, we'll just say it till we die.
It's one of the things that we don't understand as well when we started with knowledge. This is another thing that really segues into that. Estimating is one of those things where sometimes we'll throw a round number at a job just because we don't have any other choice. It's like, oh, I need that $100,000 jobs, and it's that $100,000 project.
Should probably cover it.
Should cover it, hopefully.
No.
Very dangerous thing to do. And I think when you're out of money and you're at the tail end of a job or in the middle of a job, a lot of times that's a symptom. I'm not charging enough.
Right.
I'm not winning the right jobs. And these things tie together. Like if you don't have enough of the right deals, you won't be charging enough money because you can't say no to the projects you don't make money on.
Right.
So, but I think the estimating piece as well, it's complicated.
Yeah.
It's hard.
It is hard.
We understand that. You know, it's not going to be easy.
And it's probably the thing that most people enjoy the least.
Good point.
Who are listening to the podcast. And we recognize that. We know that.
Yeah.
But it is a requirement
yes.
to ensure you're going to make money.
And if you're stuck on that, guys, if you're feeling like, man, I don't really know what I'm going to do about the estimating piece, you feel the pressure of that, try breaking it down into smaller pieces that that are understandable.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm going to build a fence, so I'm going to start off with saying I'm going to take out the old one.
Yeah.
And there's 50 posts I got to take out in this many sections, and I'm going to say, well, I've got 2 dumpsters I got to bring out there, and it's going to take me 40 hours and remove that fence. And you're thinking, well,
how much time does it take to haul it off?
Yeah.
Come back?
How many hours per section? How many hours per board? Like break it down to things you can understand.
Yep.
And then learn from it. The next time you do a fence, you say, man, I've way underbid that or way overbid that, and you're getting better.
Mm-hmm.
And then the other piece that a lot of times our pride doesn't let us do is connect with other people that know more about this than we do.
Yeah.
How many times I could have saved myself a headache by just calling up a friend and saying, man, I have no idea what I'm doing here.
Yeah.
Do you have any ideas for me?
What kind of friend would you be calling on that? Like, I think there's kind of a stigma that some contractors won't talk to other contractors in areas. And like, how do you get good advice and who do you talk to get good advice? What would you recommend on that?
I think a part of it is how you frame the question to somebody. One of the things that I've been studying more even lately is how you ask people for things. A lot of times we say, we need help here. Well, that's not a question. That's just identifying the obvious.
Yeah. You're like, I'm sorry.
Clearly,
I'm sorry you need help. Yeah.
Clearly everyone knew this guy needed help.
Yeah.
But it's almost a very specific ask of saying, Kinsey, can you help me with this specific thing?
Yeah.
You're less likely to say no.
For sure.
Because you're saying, wow, I mean, he's humble enough to ask that he recognizes he needs something.
Yeah.
But he's also asking for something very specific and also giving some boundaries around it. Would you, like, as an example, I'm having an electrical challenge. I don't know what I'm doing, but I'm trying to pretend to be an electrician.
Right.
I'm going to call up somebody else that maybe, connect with a few other guys and say, I'm starting as an electrician. I'm trying to learn, and here's the specific challenge I have. Would you be able to, maybe have 15 minutes where we can talk about it, and maybe you can help me with that?
That's good.
And if you get a no, you got to know.
Yeah, call somebody else.
Yeah, call somebody else. But you'd be surprised how many people are actually there to help.
I think the cool thing about what you said is it was like time keyed. You know what I mean? You're like, there's a start time and an end time. You're like, hey, I only need 15 minutes. You're putting some parameters around it to where it's like, I'm not expecting you to consult me on this forever.
Right.
You know what I mean? Because then it's like nobody has time to do that. Yeah. But if you're like, hey, I have a specific question.
Nobody needs another child.
Yeah, exactly.
Right. Yeah. And I think we've had some really great interactions with some people that are guests. People that are either involved using our software or people that listen to the podcast have been very respectful of our time as well. Just being like, hey, can I pick your brain for half an hour?
Yeah.
That works so great. I mean, I'll never say no to somebody like that. If I have a half an hour, if I can spare it, I will always try to connect with that person and say, and then they've been super respectful of that. And I think that always has said the next time somebody like that asks me a question, I'm like, man, that guy was very respectful of my time. He wasn't just saying, hey, listen, I've got 5,000 problems. You're going to fix all of them.
Yeah. No, it is really cool. Shows character.
Yeah.
It's good. And then I think the fourth problem, if we're going to dive into the fourth problem, spending too much money is is a problem, is for sure a problem, that the symptoms are all, you know, all
Being
those
broke,
symptoms
sometimes it's connected with spending too much money.
Yeah, a lot of times it is connected with spending too much money.
Yeah.
Can you break that down for us?
You know, it's kind of funny because when you're in a business, so many times you feel the need to buy things that you have to have. I've been there. I've been
Or
like,
in life. This could be a life thing too.
Well,
yeah, we don't have to go in there. We don't have to go there.
Yeah. In a business, we can make more excuses.
Yeah.
Like if we want to buy a Ferrari, you know, it's like, well, do you have the money for it? I mean, it's the obvious question, but in a business is less so. It's being like, well, if I have that truck, that would make me look more professional.
Right.
And I could have my tools more organized, and that would be a business expense I can write off. And some of the people that I have seen struggle with empty bank accounts are very poor with their choice of when and where to invest their money. They'll spend hundreds of thousands of dollars in the hope of a return instead of actually knowing that will have a return.
Yeah.
And maybe doing a little more like probing into the situation, like and saying, okay, well, if I spend $5,000 on that piece of machinery over the course of 2 years, I think I can make it back.
Yeah.
As opposed to being like, you know, if I spend $300,000, $400,000 on this particular idea, we're gonna get it all set up. We're gonna make a killing.
Right.
That's really risky.
Yeah.
Really risky.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think the other piece about it is timing is so important. I've made decisions to buy things that were maybe good things to buy, but the wrong time to buy them.
Right.
Maybe I should have bought that in a year instead of experiencing the cash flow crunch of buying it now. And I think that's part of running a business is cash flow.
Yeah.
Like I've got to keep enough cash on hand so I have money to pay the bills.
Right.
And buying things is not part of that usually.
Yeah. I think one thing that I hear often in a lot of small business, not just construction, is buying something to avoid taxes, you know, or like to write it off or things like that. Do you have a thought on that? We didn't talk about that before, but I just, I hear it a lot. And it's like to avoid paying taxes, they're like, I'll buy something I can't afford. You know what I mean? Like that's kind of the point. But
if you don't make any money, you'll never pay any taxes. And I think that's a real danger though, to fall in that mentality of being like, oh, I wrote off everything, I always get a refund. It's like, well, that means you didn't have any money in the bank account. And that it means you're always on the line between making it or not making it. Yeah. So I think you have to be careful with that. Structuring your business around not paying taxes can be extremely dangerous. Yeah. But I get it. I mean, who wants to pay taxes?
Yeah. And so a lot of times that leads to spending too much money is my point.
Right.
It's like, okay, well, I'm going to buy a truck because I need to write off because it's like, you know, and maybe that's true. I'm not saying it's,
maybe that's where you connect
with
with somebody else that you respect and say, okay, well, what should I be retaining back? You know, what should I be keeping in a bank account? Yeah. But some of the most successful people, I know one guy has a contracting business and he keeps cash reserves that'll cover his team for months.
Wow.
Without income.
Yeah.
And, keeping that kind of cash on hand where he realizes, hey, if a recession happens, he can scale his profit margin back where he can just keep the team busy, keep guys employed. And he doesn't have to worry about, making it or not making it. He can monitor his bank balances and make sure that every week he's sort of making money. Yeah. But he doesn't have to. Anyway, but having that kind of resource at your disposal, a piece of machinery quits on you, you can buy it. Right. I mean, you're right on the edge of not being able to run a viable business if you don't have any money in your account.
Right. This is a tangent, but it just made me think you were talking recession. And I'm like, I think a lot of people are nervous, like scared about like what happens if the market falls out, the bottom falls out, whatever. One just thing I've noticed is people that have money now that are like probably ideal clients typically still have money in a recession.
Isn't it amazing?
Whereas like if you're saying yes to every job and winning the 90%, you'll probably be hit way harder. If you don't like.
So how do you see that panning out? You're working for the wrong people, essentially, people that don't have money.
Yeah. If you're working for people who are always asking you for a deal, they're not your ideal client, things like that, you will probably struggle more in an economic struggle than you will if you are working for your ideal client, is timely in paying their bills, isn't asking for discounts, is paying for value, which those are the customers you want anyways. Yeah. So anyway, that's a tangent, but it's not even related to what we're talking about, but it's how to not be broken in an economic downturn, I guess.
It's interesting. And even with that weekly knowledge, if there was a recession, if there was an economic downturn, you would know how much money you're losing in a week. And you say, okay, what am I going to change? I'm going to cut my expenses way back. I need to cut my overhead way back. I need to sell things. I need to fire people. I mean, like you realize you just can't lose money. Whereas 3 months into it, at that point, you're reacting to the problem. Yeah. And I think we started this episode off with like the symptom of being out of money. And then we just kind of went right into almost solutioning around a long-term strategy. Right. And I think one thing we didn't really talk about, which we should really hit on in the next episode, is more or less, okay, what do you do to get out of the immediate like hot water?
Yeah.
So you can actually think.
That's good.
And so I think diving into that a little bit more too, because we're thinking a little bit more strategic. But I think we would start with knowledge, so we're not losing money next week.
Yeah.
So at least stop the bleeding. But from a standpoint of like, well, what do I do with my creditors? What do I do? Like we have some strategies that we've employed to, to deal with that. So I think that would be important to hit on.
Yeah, we'll make a note of that after the episode.
Yeah. But we could go all day.
Yeah, we could. And we have a few more things next week too. And I think one of the things is, if you're dealing with a lot of the problems that we've talked about, before you can build a solution, you have to figure out like what your weaknesses are.
It's so good.
And so just taking notes or like having that like, oh, it's a hot stove moment, when you're kind of on the edge of some of these things, I think is super important in terms of actually affecting change, short term or long term. So it's just a random thought.
Yeah, and I guess we're going random. Yeah. One thing that's really helped me as well is journaling or logging. Where you can keep track of like where I'm at, because I can go back 5 years ago and look at where I was at financially and say, oh man, I actually trended the right direction. Because sometimes it's so painful in the moment, you feel like you're never going to get out of it. And also moments like wins, breakthroughs, like you can look back at, things you've accomplished in the past, and maybe you're struggling today, but you realize, man, I did some things right in the past. So what was that?
Yeah.
And kind of go back to that sometimes. That can help.
That's a good point. I think along that same tangent, making sure that, at least seeing what are the symptoms and what are the problems helps you to like get away from the mindset of like, well, is there a silver bullet moment? This is my breakthrough moment. This is my, okay, it's going to be so much better next week. It's going to be so much better next month. And I think that's a little bit of what we're trying to say is that if your mindset or some of your practices match what we're talking about today, it's going to require more than just like next month it'll be better sort of mindset, or like the lottery ticket mindset.
Right. And that is, this problem will go away when this big moment happens.
Right.
And it's so easy for any of us to do that.
Slip into that.
Yeah. Where it's the silver bullet mentality. Yeah. Yeah. Where when we hit this one project, all of our problems go away. And you're really putting all your eggs in one basket, so to speak. You're saying I have to do this one thing. Larry, the cable guy, has on his one of his routines, somebody, the lottery gets up to 300 something odd million. He's talking to his buddy and the guy says, man, I really need that money. And he says, well, you need that money, 300 million. He's like, what kind of trouble do you got yourself into? And I think a lot of times it sounds silly when somebody's acting like that, but we can act similarly and just saying, well, with this big breakthrough moment, we'll all be millionaires, as opposed to being like, well, are we going the right direction today?
Yeah, that's good.
And not assume on the future.
For sure. And I think there's a preparatory place to where it's like you need to learn to walk some of these things out before you have a moment of breakthrough, so that way it's not gone in an instant. Whenever you do have that moment of breakthrough, it's like lottery winners or football players or the statistics show that the money's gone in a very short period of time for lottery winners or
the windfall
football players or things like that. And so I think that's our heart is getting to the like, why is this happening, to help guys, gals, businesses set off on the right foot.
That's good.
What are your final thoughts?
Being broke is not the problem. It's just a symptom. Yeah. And I think it's freeing in one sense, is that when you are
frustrating in the other.
It's painful, and I'm sorry. And I think the other thing is we react to pain and we can learn from it. And I think also being in the moment, being real time with it, you need to be there, and go 1 week at a time. Like let's not let last week's losses or wins influence this week, in the sense of we need to build a winning strategy, learn from the mistakes, build on the wins, and go week to week as opposed to big picture. And we can get really bogged down and be like, man, last year was terrible, and kind of living like what ifs and we should have, and that's painful. So moving on from that, and then just going from strength to strength. Yeah, I think it's so important. Yeah, it's tough, guys. Once you have the knowledge, you're armed with information, that's step one. You got to start there. And when you know you're going the right direction, you know what kind of decisions you need to make. That's good. Yeah. Let us know in the comments what you guys have learned just in your own businesses and like breakthrough moments, or how you got from being broke to not broke, or things like that. What you guys learned along the way, what we're missing. Let's help each other out, in the comments really help
help other people get other nuggets that maybe you've learned from in your experience and things like
I've
that.
been broke, guys. I've had moments where things were not going in the right direction, where things were late, where things were challenging, stressful.
Yeah.
And those things have forced me to learn more, to dig deep and say, what's the problem, and to diagnose it. So don't, we started this off. That is not you. That doesn't define you. Being broke is not, that's not part of your humanity. Money's a tool. So don't be discouraged in all of this. It's also not something to compare ourselves with other people. There'll always be someone with more money and, whatever. It's just a tool.
Yeah.
So make it work for you, and you just need to be able to use the tool better.
It's good.